5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, David, welcome to the Breakdown Podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Good to be here.
Interested to dive into agency life with you and what's happening at Vaulted Oak and WordPress, your whole take on things. I am a recovering agency owner. Many years ago, I ran an agency for a little over a decade, and then started having kids, and I was like, oh, I need a real job now. Like, yeah. I need something that I can survive with and sort of take a step back from the stresses of running an agency. We were just chatting in the green room before we hit record. Know the co-founder of Peter had him on a previous podcast that I did. Agency life is pretty wild. What's your day-to-day in agency life at Vaulted Oak? And then we're going to dive into some of running an agency and what your agency outlook is. But what do you do day-to-day at Vaulted Oak?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share. And yeah, agency life, it's, I don't have kids yet, so it's one where I feel like it's, I can put more time and energy into it, but I understand when those other priorities would pop up, then you'd have to look at it and be like, yeah, okay, maybe I don't need to be up at this hour of the night doing X or Y or Z. Right now I enjoy it, but that will probably change. But in the meantime, no, I really enjoy the day-to-day. I'm the account director here at Vaulted Oak, so handling the internal client stakeholder management, external partnerships, opportunities like this, collaborating with other organizations, podcasts, interviews, networking, vendor partners as well. So a lot of relationship building, brainstorming, and, focusing really on building that relationship and that trust, which, as you mentioned, you had met Peter years ago and had him on a different podcast. That's really the ethos and MO of Barrel Holdings, is really about delivering that value and, just long-term trust, long-term partnership, because even if it's a slower burn, it definitely pays off in the end. So that's what I dedicate my time doing, day in, day out.
We'll unpack sort of the maybe Barrel as a whole, Barrel Holdings. This is one of the more interesting concepts that Peter and I used to chat about, or had chatted about many years ago, is sort of breaking apart the different layers of an agency. And instead of having maybe this one agency that does it all, in Barrel sense, you have 2, 4, 6, 7. You have 7 different sort of like brands under Barrel. Help the listener understand how Vaulted Oak slots into the rest of it. Do you do like cross communication with the brands and say, oh, by the way, you've done business with Vaulted Oak, Mrs. Customer. We also have this brand over here that can help you in these areas. Is it as simple as that, or does Vaulted Oak sort of operate in its own sort of silo away from everything else?
I'd say it's a little bit of both, and kind of the best of both worlds. Like, we're definitely independent, and I'll explain how that came to be. And then, simple as that in terms of the collaboration, sending a Slack message to another one of our, sibling agency, owners or co-founders, email introduction. Hey, we have this prospect that came across our desk that we think they'd be a better fit for you, or in our discussions with the client, or prospect, or let's say become a client, and then we learn about other areas of their business. Oh, okay, actually we have some recommended partners for that as well. And so it starts with kind of the concentric circle of our sibling agencies, and then we have, let's say, cousin agencies and second cousin agencies. So of course we seek to keep it in the family at first, but we also, the Barrel Holdings companies don't exhaust all capabilities, and so we want to find the right fit to begin with. So Vaulted Oak, we were spun off from Barrel back in 2021. Barrel's been around for almost 20 years now as an e-commerce firm and digital agency. And so back in 2021, there was a need to create a separate department, separate entity to handle the ongoing support and maintenance, right? The post-launch. I've worked in other agencies and actually have helped stand up support and maintenance divisions within those agencies, showing a need for, the allocated resources for post-launch, because it's a very different life cycle approach, mental bandwidth of a start to finish build and post-launch ongoing support. So it was really cool to come in contact with Vaulted Oak and Barrel and see a company that had actually become not only spun off internally as a department, but then its own entity. So it was just a natural fit. And so that's how we slot in. We handle, we do maybe a couple start to finish builds every quarter, but really the majority of our work is what happens after you launch a website. And that's where we provide that support. And so it's really great. We focus, our main platforms are Shopify, WordPress, makes it very easy. And then that way for Barrel or the other companies within the Barrel Holdings network, when they know of a company that maybe doesn't need a brand new website because they just built one, but they just need some, occasional ticket support, that's what we're here for.
So one of the things I think is really interesting here is I think a lot of agencies, I'll paint this picture, then you I'll draw the outline. You can fill it in if I'm right or wrong. But I think a lot of agencies, who are focused in on WordPress, like a lot of the folks listening to this podcast, a lot of folks who use Gravity Forms are obviously primarily WordPress driven agencies. They'll sort of hedge the technology bet with, let's say, maybe, another open source, maybe more static framework, right? They're building things, with Next.js and, Tailwind. They're doing things like more static. And that's sort of, they hedge against the WordPress thing just a little bit. Oh, the client doesn't fit the perfect WordPress mold. Oh, we got this thing over here we can kind of solve it with. I think Barrel's approach is how I see it is, oh, you want Webflow? We have a whole agency, it's not, we don't have like a specialist Webflow person on our WordPress team. We have a whole other agency, or Shopify, or Framer agency I see with Bolster. Talk about that. Is there ever a handoff where a client comes in to maybe say BX Studio, which handles your Webflow stuff, and they go, oh, you know what? We actually want WordPress, and then they come over to your side, or vice versa? How does that work?
Yeah, I think that's pretty common. And, from your experience with agency life, you know that when a prospect reaches out, right? When a company reaches out with their initial requirements, that's not always what ends up as the actual project or, SOW at the end, right? And that's something that we really take to heart, is defining those needs, really understanding, okay, why are you doing this to begin with? And sometimes we'll straight up tell them, well, actually, you don't need our services. This is not actually a great fit, and we're not going to try to just squeeze you into it just because to have some revenue or to work with you. Let's actually find out what you're looking for, what you're actually looking to achieve, because a fair amount of the time, not all the time, the companies, they don't spend as much time in the actual tech and solutions as we do, right? So they look at a problem, especially small business owners or, Shopify clients, and they say, oh, this is what we need to do, and these are the options that we know are available. And then they'll come to us and we'll actually explore a little deeper of like, okay, well, what are you actually looking to achieve? What are the objectives? And let's find a reasonable solution, rather than just approaching it as, okay, you come to us, here are our services, and then now we'll try to fit you into our services. So yeah, it happens quite often that someone will come to us or BX, and through that conversation actually find out that they're a better fit for, us or one of the other agencies, and then we'll make that recommendation. And so yeah, and I think that's also what helps too in our specialization with each agency, is that we're very clear with our core capabilities. Of course, there's always outlier cases, and there's always opportunities where maybe we'll pick something up like a Next.js or maybe a one-off Drupal site. But again, that's really because we want to do the work and we have that, a team member or, the ability and the chops to do so, but we're not seeking to make that a vertical or actually replicate that long term. So there's always, some gray cases that we'll pick up, but I think it's really helpful for us and the industry when we're very straightforward about this is what we specialize in. And if you aren't looking for that, we can point you in the right direction.
I want to zoom out and talk about operating in the particular environments that you work in, WordPress and Shopify. Vaulted Oak is lucky enough to serve both crowds, right? WordPress and Shopify. That's always I don't want to say heated debate, but in the WordPress, community. And quite often WordPress growth is compared only next to Shopify as the next CMS of bigger potential growth year after year. Is there a way for you to illustrate what it's like working in WordPress environment versus a Shopify? Like, do you get more commercial support from Shopify? You have somebody you can call on the Shopify side versus WordPress where you're like, no, we have to go and figure this out. Is there any kind of compare and contrast that you can do from those two worlds?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think to start with, we recommend the platforms based, kind of what I said before, on need, right? So we don't have a preference of, use Shopify or use WordPress. In our experience, we find that e-commerce platforms and companies, for what a lot of them do, we would recommend Shopify. We have worked with other companies on WordPress, and just based on their setup, WordPress site with, a WooCommerce or, a similar, offering. And so we'll just, again, look at what they're actually looking for and then point them in the right direction. We don't really care so much which one they use as long as it's a good fit for them. And so, I think the two worlds are cool and interesting to straddle. I'd say Shopify, the framework just based on the commercial nature of it and the growth of the company, all of the investments Shopify has made to other vendor partners in terms of Shopify apps and third-party platforms, definitely makes it a more startup-y ecosystem, which is neat, and there's definitely more support there from the sense of like these vendors all have a lot of teams because they've gone through some level of funding, and it's easier to contact them, or you've seen them at an event, or they're hosting an event, right? So it's just more built out, but that's just because of the nature of the commercial aspect of it. But in the WordPress, it's also really neat because I was at WordCamp US in September of 2024 in Portland. That's where I met Mike from Gravity Forums and Carol from Yoast, and how we ended up connecting. And it was also really cool to see the open source, collaborative, more independent nature of WordPress as well, which doesn't make it less support, it just makes it a different type of support. So I think both are pretty unique. I'm glad I get to be in both, because with the WordPress, we also get to work with a lot of nonprofit clients, which is a very different pace. And so it's a nice mix to be able to work with, let's just say, straight e-commerce, very simple. They want to sell retail, D2C, etc. And then the WordPress sides, which it's a little funkier, nonprofits, different pace, a little bit more artsy. And I think that plays into the WordPress community at large. So I hope that's helpful, but it's pretty cool to see. And, it's almost like being, having different friends. Maybe you're not going to always, there's one friend that you'll go to a sports game with, and another friend you're like, no, we're going to play board games. So it's just, that's how I'd relate it.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to break it down. I'm curious, you mentioned before, look, we're really not trying to push either technology, Shopify or let's say WooCommerce, but but you said if it fits the client, is there a particular area where WordPress or WooCommerce fits the client? Like you would say, oh yeah, you're looking for this, you definitely need WooCommerce. And what is that, if you can share?
I think it's more when they need WordPress, like that they're not a good fit for Shopify, but they still have some e-commerce functionality, and they're not looking to migrate to Shopify. Let's say, we worked with an educational organization the past year, helped them redesign and rebuild their site. There's no need for them to be on Shopify because the majority of their content was information, articles, events, the usual kind of nonprofit or WordPress makeup of a site. But then they also had this e-commerce piece, right? So it doesn't make sense for them to go to Shopify just based on the functionality there that they wouldn't be using or taking advantage of. And again, it wouldn't really fit that platform. And so that would be an example of, okay, you're an organization that has some e-commerce functionality, but it's not your main one. Then let's go with WordPress, and then, with a WooCommerce. And then similarly, we've actually worked with clients on Shopify who have deactivated their e-commerce function, but still remain on Shopify because it doesn't make sense at that point to migrate, say, to WordPress or a different CMS, also because they might reactivate the e-commerce function in the future. So I hope those are kind of two examples that illustrate like just the different cases that we deal with, and when it's actually so nice that there's so many people creating these platforms and technologies, because it makes it easy for us to be able to say, oh, okay, here are your options, and which direction do you want to go in.
sort of hinted at some of the stack that you like working with, obviously on the WordPress side. Like we've mentioned WooCommerce, we mentioned Yoast, you mentioned obviously you're here for with Gravity Forms, or because you introduced us with Gravity Forms. But is there ever something in the WordPress side where you're kind of just like, that other platform, that Webflow or that Shopify has this thing that's pretty cool? Like, is there anything on the other side of the fence where you're ever like, man, I really wish WordPress had that thing over that other team gets to use that we don't get to use on the WordPress side?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say Shopify, in terms of its ability to, spin up product pages and, the advancements they've made over the past year with checkout, I think that's really a defining feature for them that just makes it so seamless for people to interact with the products and then check out. I'd say that's probably the main one. Theme-wise, there's various to choose from, but that's similar to WordPress. I think just the out-of-the-box solution nature of Shopify is what has made, was what's grown it into the company it is today. And I think the product pages and checkout functionality, they've really improved it, and it's seamless, right? The one-page checkout and the checkout extensions that they've created.
I've often heard like, oh yeah, it's very, it's so much easier and so much more, let's say, affordable to use Shopify. But I feel like once you start stacking up like the little apps and stuff that Shopify requires a store to build, you're raising that monthly bill pretty quickly. Like it looks, hey, $29 a month, you got to start with a Shopify account, and then people say, oh, you have to buy all these plugins for WordPress. But you start playing with Shopify, you quickly tick the box of that monthly bill going up, and you haven't even started to sell anything yet. You're just setting it up. Any compare contrast on like Shopify apps versus the world of WordPress plugins? Like Gravity Forms is only a couple $100 a year if you have the elite license, and you can do so much with it. Any thoughts on pricing models, Shopify versus WordPress?
Yeah, I think you make a point, and I think that's something that we talk to very transparently with our clients about, is just evaluating when it's right to say start with Shopify app, when it's right to maybe grow to that next level of that app, and then maybe when it's right to actually build something custom so that you're less reliant on that app in the long term, right? But that's all at the life cycle and the stage of the business and what they want in terms of investment overall. Because let's say they want to come to us with custom work. Sure, it might be a larger lift, but then they own it in the sense of they're able to make sure that if that app is sunset starting tomorrow, they're not affecting, and then, it's not affecting them and then having to actually scramble, right? But again, there's some of our clients that's fine. They use only a couple apps. They don't need the really advanced versions, and therefore something custom wouldn't be right for them. So I think that is a good point, and it's something that we just inform our clients about. They're like, okay, it's good to have all these apps, and this is something, a huge benefit of Shopify, but also think about it from the price standpoint and also from the performance standpoint, right? In terms of the site speed of having all of these apps on the site, right? So it's something you have to be careful of and be choice in terms of the decisions you're making. WordPress plugins, yeah, I find that they're, again, because of the nature of the WordPress community, feel like there are possibly more options for and flexibility within that in terms of just the creation of these tools and these technologies. And so that's what I find that for our team, when we're looking at solutions for WordPress plugins, it seems to be, again, because a lot of our WordPress clients are nonprofit, doesn't often seem to be an issue where it becomes a matter of price. So that's what I would say, just to illustrate the different worlds of plugins and apps. And at the same token, Shopify, as I think I mentioned before, has invested in a handful of these apps. So then at least with these, that there's going to be some long-term viability and stability, right? And then you can rely on them. So depends, I sound like a broken record, but depends on, the life of the business, where it's at, and, the proper recommendation therein. But WordPress has been really, really easy for us to find plugins that work and work quickly, and then replace if need be, and at a low price point, especially for our nonprofits.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a plugin that's been around for almost 15 years and has been reliable in that space, and that is Gravity Forms. You've been mentioning a lot of nonprofit work. Is that where Gravity Forms sits really well for you and your clients, building out nonprofit donation pages, user registration, membership? How do you leverage Gravity Forms, or how do your clients leverage Gravity Forms in some of the solutions that you're putting together?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so when we were looking at collaboration with Gravity Forms and seeing how many of our clients used Gravity Forms. Of course, the WordPress side of the business, majority of them are the nonprofits. We do have some for-profit WordPress clients that also use it, but a majority is the nonprofits, which I think is interesting. Having worked previously in the nonprofit sector, both with a nonprofit organization or two, and then with agency dedicated for nonprofits, they really don't have the time to explore a lot of different options, and so they really need something reliable. And when they find something reliable, it probably will be like a decade or two before they revisit that, right? Just based on board approval and everything. And so, I'd say a clip probably above 90% of our nonprofit clients use Gravity Forms. And exactly what you mentioned, it's user registration, email capture, donation pages, and just making sure that they have a reliable way to receive information from their users, from their volunteers, etc. So those are the main use cases, and this quarter we're going to start detailing and highlighting some of those case studies, some of the more typical ones and then some more atypical ones, and also as an effort to illustrate to our nonprofit clients that maybe there's functionality with Gravity Forms that you're not yet using, right? And you can expand that would actually help your operations. So excited for that.
I'm part of a small nonprofit that my best friend started a little over a year ago. And of course, the site's built in WordPress using Gravity Forms for like the donation pages and such. But that market, and I love your opinion on this too, but that market is, wow, they have received there's so many like donation platforms, donation for sports platforms, donations, like regular donation platforms. We run this 3-on-3 basketball tournament, right, every year. And with the specific requirements that my friend and his wife both lead this nonprofit. And the way that they do like registration and have kids come in and parents can request certain things, like there's no nonprofit, no like out of the box donation platform that's going to do this. These requirements, you're not going to find it. But the ones that do sort of like cater to the space that you could semi like massage to do it, you're spending for a nonprofit, you're spending like a few $100 a month, never mind like the transaction fees and their fees that they keep. And your mind just looks at that and you go, I can do this with Gravity Forms. And you want to like tell the world about it, but still there's a complexity there, right? Mm-hmm. There's these folks who run these nonprofits, most of them are not technical, and they're not going to sit down and like build a solution with Gravity Forms and implement it. So it takes folks like you and I, to do this for them. But wow, there's so much you can tailor to in a nonprofit world with Gravity Forms and like the specific fields and flows and, conditional logic and all this stuff, where other platforms either can't solve it or they try to solve it and they just want loads and loads of money for a nonprofit, to implement it. I don't know if you have any kind of story or first world experience with that Gravity Forms solving something, but your thoughts on just like the donation platforms at large.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. I think it's also a reflection of the nonprofit sector and just changes over the past, decade and a half. And with the increase of these various technologies and just the shift to digital, a lot of these platforms are a little bit archaic and bulky and expensive, right? And so it's one of those that's been in place. The nonprofits are overly reliant on it, and there aren't necessarily a lot of, again, an out-of-the-box solution that does what they need, because similar to the businesses that we work with, nonprofits also have, various needs. Some are focused on donations in terms of financial. Some are focused on donations in terms of material. Some are other focused on just education, brand awareness. I mean, they've got all a spectrum of call to actions, right? And so I think, like you said, they don't have the team to look at these options, explore, and even if they did, have the bandwidth to implement them internally, right? And so that's why we also provide a support, not just from the technical side, but also from the consultative aspect of actually being able to guide them and also, provide them with the insight so it makes it easy as possible on their end. But yeah, in terms of Gravity Forms, even from the agency that I worked at previously that dedicated to nonprofit work, countless times where that was our go-to. I think in terms of a migration or a shift, there was a couple. It's been a couple years. I don't remember the exact details of it, but we were looking and actually achieved the process of going away from some of these larger, expensive platforms that maybe served a purpose at the time, but no longer going forward. So that was helpful. And then, currently right now, I don't think there's a single client that we have with Gravity Forms that we have really an issue with, or that it's, an obstacle. In fact, it's something that they know, which for all businesses, but especially nonprofits, it's just that peace of mind. They know they don't have to think about it. And that is, the most valuable investment, in my opinion, for business.
I want to close it off by just talking about Vaulted Oak's pricing plans and your approach to business. For the, we're at the start of literally the second day into 2025. Somebody listening to this who's a freelancer or a little boutique agency, and they're setting their plans forward for growing their agency in 2025. I'm not saying they should copy you, because they can't, but I like the business model that Vaulted Oak has sort of put out on the homepage. It's vaulted-oak.com if you want to check it out, or if you just want to partner with Vaulted Oak, you can go to that website too and reach out. For many, many years, I think anyone listening to this who has been around WordPress for as long as I have, certainly as long as Gravity Forms has, we remember the days of WordPress support companies being like, buy an hour, every single month, tick the little box and you can buy a certain amount of hours and the price goes up every month. I like how you all have this set up on the homepage. You have quarterly, and then the hours that you can buy quarterly. And it's just set in stone, quarterly, 6-month minimum contract, 2 quarters with no rollover hours. Talk to us about that approach, and how does that work for, I assume everything's working well for you, but I think a lot of people, when they get into the game, they go, oh man, I have to sell minimum hours. How is the customer going to approve of this? How does that perceived with your customers when you walk in with a quote for minimum hours every quarter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think, and our approach is again, that lens of long-term, right? And so with the quarterly plans, it's providing a platform for, okay, well, we want to get to know you and your business and your tech stack and your site. And the more time we spend with it, the better we're going to get to know it. And, the time that our developers have worked for a site for 2 years, et cetera, a project manager on that site, they know the situation, right? And so that's often why, and as you've seen in handoffs or when clients move agencies, it definitely has to be the right move, because it's bulky, it's expensive, and if you don't have the proper documentation, you're having to get to know a site and all of its quirks to start with. And so that's why we really emphasize the quarterly and the recurring, because it allows us both from the, let's say, qualitative level to get to know the client and the site and plan for long term. Just had an account meeting this morning to think about, okay, what is our goal for 2025 and what is the theme for each quarter. And then from even a quantitative side, we're able to, within reason, be able to look at okay, maybe this quarter we're going above your quarterly, but then next quarter you don't have a lot going on because of your seasonality, so it works out. Or vice versa, we need to adjust because we're lower this quarter and higher that quarter. So it also allows for just more month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year planning, which I think provides better efficiency, both in terms of the actual work itself and the investment, both from the client side and then the investment for us in terms of the time. And then just to quickly touch upon what you said, freelancers, consultants, I think it's important to have, good boundaries when it comes to pricing and plans, to value your work and to understand that, when you have a minimum, there's always going to be that extra time that's spent that you're not necessarily going to bill for, especially in a business development stage. And I think it's important to have that minimum because it sets the expectation for the client that there's going to be work required, And I think when clients expect something not to be way more expensive than it is, but just to know that, okay, this is what our range is, I think it helps build maturity on both ends, rather than just saying, okay, yeah, here's 1 hour, because I think everybody knows you charge for an hour, you probably spent 2.5 on that to bill that hour. So I think it's good, and that's my advice to any small business owner, is always raise your prices, but not just from a sense of jacking up the prices, but like value yourself, value your time, and then it actually builds, I think, mature long-term relationships for both sides, which I think is important.
Yeah, I've never seen a short-term contract or plan ever go well with in the WordPress world. I spent after agency life, spent a few years selling enterprise level WordPress hosting as an account executive. And man, like some of my like top clients who were just like always look at very price sensitive, let's say, and they would just bring on either freelance contractor after freelance contractor or try to do like a short stint, which I also understand. Like a lot of those clients were in like media, margins were pretty thin. So I understood why they were doing it, but it was always like just patchwork after patchwork, as they moved along, and then they get to like the 6th contractor in a year and they're just unraveling all the work from the last person. It's like, man, you should have just stayed with somebody long term. We wouldn't have this issue.
Passed through so many hands, and every time it does that, it adds complexity and scope and price. And that's, I think, to kind of sum up on that note, that's something, and both even for, let's say, personal budget as we start the year too, I think it's so easy for you and I to prepare and budget for the big items. Let's say the $1,000, expense at home, or the $3,000 vacation, or whatever it is. It's easier to be like, oh, okay, that's how much it is. But we don't account for the $50, the $25, the $75, the $125 that actually adds up to more than that big item. And so that's something that we always, approach and share and kind of coach our clients. It's like, be prepared for the small things that add up, because that ends up to be more expensive than the big item that you're aware of, how expensive and what work is required. So yeah, hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I can tell you I'm going down in a few more months to a friend's wedding in Florida, and I have 3 young boys. And I'm looking at the flights, and I'm like, it's $4,000 just to fly down. My wife's like, so what? We'll turn it into a vacation. I'm like, but you're forgetting, we've got 3 young boys, and we could add up all that stuff, while we're down there. That $3,000 or $4,000 in flights is going to be like $10,000 all in to go to this wedding.
It's the small things that add up. Well, it sounds like a good time. Yeah. Florida this time of year, or any time.
Yeah. David Ries from Vaulted Oak, vaulted-oak.com. Thanks for hanging out today. Anywhere you want folks to go to check you out to say thanks, or just head to the website.
Yeah, head to the website or find us on LinkedIn. We, try to do our best to share some thought leadership and industry insights about what we learn, and that can be useful to agency owners, clients, nonprofits, the world at large.
Awesome stuff. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. It's the Breakdown Podcast, gravityforms.com/breakdown. That's it for today's episode. If you could do one more thing for me today, share this episode on social media, your favorite Facebook group or Discord channel. Spread the word about this podcast. It really helps. If you haven't added Breakdown to your favorite podcast app, point your browser to gravityforms.com/breakdown and click the icon of your app to add us and listen to us every 2 weeks. Okay, we'll see you in the next episode.